So Rosie, we probably should end there because then maybe people start writing their checks and then we can you can go home and feel as though mission was accomplished. But how are
Oh,
you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. And it's really a pleasure to be with you and all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you so very much. You know, we I don't think we last talked until probably right in the beginning of the pandemic, and of course, what this meant for United Way. And I'm sure that that's been a harrowing experience for you and your nonprofits, but also what you've done, what's evolved out of that. A lot of good things have come out of that. So maybe you can share some of that with us.
Sure. Well, I think to your point, none of us saw COVID coming, and we didn't see the pandemic coming. And once we found ourselves in the moment, no one could have anticipated that it would last as long as it has. But I think it has brought some disparities to light, where many of the needs that were already there, Denise, were simply exacerbated. And I think that it's also given us an opportunity to look much more critically as to how we deliver those services and how do we expand those services, because now even more of our neighbors and families found themselves in need. So yes, you're correct. The pandemic has simply brought to light some of the issues that were literally already there.
I know we're here to talk. So the feedback there, Shevry. We're here to talk about the Changemakers education series, but I'm just curious too, as it relates to the nonprofits that are members of United Way, because we talk about small businesses, we talk about the closure of small businesses, the loss. What's been the experience on the nonprofit side? Have they been able to survive this, or have you seen some of them have to close their doors as well?
We've seen both. We've seen some who were small, but what you found is many of the donors, the donor base for some shrank because so many people found themselves in need who traditionally could have been donors, especially when it comes to the economic part of the pandemic. And then you've seen others to thrive, like food banks and things of that nature, because they've gotten the attention that food insecurity was one of the first things that became an issue when we found ourselves in the crisis. It was followed by, it was really there because of the education component, because we realized that so many of our children, the only nutritious meal they were receiving was when they were in school. And when they weren't in school, we found out that many of those families were very much, food insecure. And so what you see are those issues that rise to the top, where it's a huge conglomerate of need. They got the attention, and they continue to get the attention because so many families are certainly in need. And that's everything from the food insecurity to the distance learning and all of the supports that are there, getting all of the Chromebooks to all of the public schools, children. And then once they have the technology, you found out, oh, it doesn't do us any good to have the Chromebook if you don't have connectivity. And then you had to learn, that many families, the digital divide is real. And so it's just a matter of recognizing we've had to follow the need, we've had to evolve, and it requires us to still do that. We're in a constant state of looking at what not a new normal will be, but what a better normal is going to be.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad that there is some focus and analysis of that, because communities don't always express what their needs are until there's almost a crisis, and that's where we were during the pandemic. The Changemakers education series, did that come out of what you all also observed, or is this a special initiative? Tell us about that.
Well, it's been something that's we've had ongoing in terms of just having the series of having these thoughtful conversations, if you will. This particular Changemaker series, to your point, and I'm thanking you so much for highlighting it, launched March 14th. So we're just sort of kind of 2 weeks in, and it's really the first of 10 sessions that we're going to have, and convening thought leaders around some thoughtful conversations on trends that are happening here in the National Capital Region, but also bringing solutions to some of those toughest challenges and bringing some equity solutions to the table as well. And we're really looking at the intersectionality, if you will, of gender and race and equity and program design, effectiveness, the impact of COVID, so on and so forth. So mental health, you name it, we're going to be talking about all of those things over the course of the next 10 months.
And so give me an example, Rosie, of maybe one or two of those topics you're talking about, and how and who will be sort of the experts, I guess, in these conversations.
Sure. Well, the first session that we just had that kicked off on March 14th, because of course it is Women's History Month, and I love the fact that you noted how we're ending the month with hopefully the confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. But the first one that we talked about was women in the workplace. Back in June of 2021, McKinsey did a study that talked about the exodus of women from the workplace, primarily due to the pandemic. And it really highlighted so much of the backbone that women have in the workplace, but also who was disproportionately impacted by the workplace, decisions that have to be made for many families, because women have traditionally been seen as the primary caregivers in the home. And so in that conversation, we had, a woman who had been in the workforce, had lost her husband, had the means to not have to go back into the workforce, but saw other women who didn't have that opportunity, and was able to sort of kind of highlight, how do we garner that strength that they have and that know-how that they have, and not lose that genius. We also had Jennifer Porter, who leads the mayor's office on women's policy, who was able to talk about what it has meant for the District of Columbia and what it's meant in this region around women in the workplace, and what the exodus of that genius, what that looks like, and who's been impacted more so around it. So it's really been a big trend. But again, that was the first that we kicked off in the Changemaker series.
Is the series primarily focused on women?
No, the series will have different topics. So we will deal with everything from mental health. We'll deal with advancing equity. We'll look at it from a racial lens, from an economic lens. We will deal with gender and equity and what happens there for women versus men. So I think that because we are very women-centric, and being the first female CEO at Your United Way, we can't forget what it means in our society for why women are so important. And so we don't believe it should be limited to simply 1 month, any different than we believe that Black history should be limited to 1 month as well. We really want to talk about it so we're as inclusive as possible in recognizing what these trends mean to our community at large. So yes, it'll be an ongoing conversation.
And how do you anticipate the impact of this? What is the end result? Are we looking at maybe addressing some public policy issues, empowering women to know where the resources are? What is the end game here?
Absolutely, all of the above. We definitely want to bring attention, because you'd be amazed, Denise, at how many people didn't realize that women were such a part of the workforce. And in the last 24 months or so, as we've gone through COVID, it had not come to the forefront that women were the ones, quote unquote, being forced to leave the workforce. And now, as we're returning to the office, not returning to work, because for many of us, we've been working all along, but when we talk about what it means to return to the office, and how we have to now evolve and look at what we're looking, and how we're making the criteria for what the return to the office looks like. Is it a hybrid fashion? What about people who have small kids that are still doing distance learning? What about if you are caring for a parent, if you will, if you have other significant challenges that prevent it being, quote unquote, just as it was before? So I think it's challenged us to think about, what are the solutions for return to the office? How do we meet our workforce where they are? How do we look at effectiveness and efficiencies in a much different manner? And as employers, how do we ensure that we compete for talent and meet people where they are in terms of being able to get that genius in our respective organizations and businesses?
Yeah, and as you say this, it makes me think about all the scenarios that you just painted as it relates to women in the workforce, and whether they're in person or remote. But it seems as though if it's a remote situation, it almost devalues. It could almost devalue sort of the input that women give because they're not there, they're not present, they're not seen, they're not at the table. Unlike men who just assume to be, have those positions and that power. How does
Yeah.
that impact? What I mean, I'm sure there's somebody at home thinking, do I go back to work? If I can work from home, would it be better for me to work from home? And what does that mean for me in the long term?
I think that there are a couple of different things. It certainly depends on the individual and their specific circumstance. But I think you should be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. Meaning that if it's better for you to remain home, then you should be able to make the case because generally, most employers want you to be able to bring your genius to work and they shouldn't care about how they get it. And if it's more important for just to have someone in the office, but their mind is somewhere else, you're not getting their best anyway. And so I think it's incumbent upon us not to look at things in such a formalized fashion, meaning that, core hours will likely change. I have to admit, coming back into the office a couple of times, Denise, in the commute, I have to get my commuter muscle back because it's now something I hadn't done. And so it's a matter of thinking, how do we look at capturing the best of our people who, if they have to leave the workforce, they don't leave their brains on the floor. They still take them with them. And why can't we access that genius? Why can't we access that expertise and know-how? And if it means that we have to look at things a little bit different than we have traditionally, then I think we're going to have to do that. To compete for talent, we're going to have to offer a lot of flexibility, and we're going to have to look at things with a new lens, how we recruit. And not make judgments. If you see a space in someone's resume that they've been out of the workforce for a period of time, you don't make a judgment. You deal with the person who's sitting in front of you, making his or her case as to why they're the best person for their job. You have to figure out, as an employer, as an organization, how do you simply meet people where they are so that they can bring their best to you? And it won't be necessarily 100% in the office. It won't be 9 to 5. Sometimes it'll be 5 to 10 p.m. or what have you, and when people can bring their best to it. But if you were serious about the work getting done, then we should become less stringent about how it's getting done.
You just sounded like you've been eavesdropping on our conversations here at the Informer as we look at how we get stuff done. I mean, I could go on with this because I think it's really great. One question though I have, because I'm also at that point and know a lot of folks that are, these people who have retired from the workforce and they're still what we now perceive as still fairly young. They're maybe in their late 50s, early 60s, and at some point want to get back into the workforce. Is that a part of any of your conversations as well? And then lastly, just kind of tell me or tell us how people can participate in these
Sure.
Conversations.
Sure. I will say, anyone who has something to offer should be valued in society, no matter where they are on the age spectrum. I think that when you look at many of our seniors, if you will, that may be out of the workforce in a formalized or in a day-to-day fashion, still have something to offer. And so I think we can meet them. Sometimes it could be on a part-time basis, because again, the genius is still there. The expertise is still there. I think you can sometimes engage it in a volunteer manner, because for some, if it's not a matter of really truly being in the workforce, but they simply want to have something to do and they have something to offer, we find a way to meet them on that spectrum. And so volunteerism is huge. And again, part-time is an option as well for those who simply still want to be in the workforce. So I think that there are a myriad of ways that you can meet people where they are and be able to access and appreciate all that they bring to the table.
Sorry about that. And assuming that employers understand that as well, I think it's a good deal. How can people become engaged with the education series? Is there something go to the website? How does it work?
They can absolutely go to our website, which is United Way NCA for National Capital Area.org. I see the Facebook, IG, and Twitter handles that are there for any of your readers and listeners to see. But it's also just sometimes calling us and finding out, not only what's happening for the Changemaker series, but there are a myriad of things that they can engage with your United Way on. It's volunteer efforts with kit packing to help those who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. It's, being able to volunteer with many of our education initiatives, to be able to go to our financial empowerment centers. We have 5 across this region that your readers and listeners can have access to. And even if it's not something they have to offer, but a particular need that they may have that needs to be met, we stand ready to do our best to offer a solution to our neighbors in need as well. So it's a two-way street, if you will. Certainly we want our donors to help us to do even more because the need is greater. And we have finite resources for infinite needs. But it's also for them to be able to engage us if they have needs, but also if they have resources and if simply they have time.
Wonderful. Well, Rosie Allen-Herring, thank you so very much for joining us and for sharing all the updates on what you all are doing over at United Way. It's good that you're still here supporting the community and supporting nonprofits. And we're in the midst of a campaign right now, aren't we?
Well, we're always in the midst of a campaign at Your United Way. It's a 24-hour, 365-day effort. And so, anytime that donors want to reach out to us, they certainly can. And I will say this, one of the things that we've really come to evolve is being a part of community and caring does not mean you have to be a millionaire. Everyone can simply do something. And so for any of your readers and or listeners, and Washington Informer is such an institution. I adore it, having been a Washingtonian for a little bit of time now from being a student at Howard University. Your readers and listeners have done so much, and they continue to do that partnership with us. So whatever you decide to do and how much you can tend to offer will certainly be appreciated, but we promise, more importantly, to be a good steward of what's been entrusted to us so that you can believe and trust that the work is being done and that whatever contribution you choose to make is going to good use. So again, sometimes it's time and treasure that we value as well. So we're simply grateful for you, Denise Rolark Barnes, and your phenomenal leadership and that of your entire Washington Informer team for just being our partners on this journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us today. And
Thank
we'll
you.
be following up again soon.
Absolutely.